The text for our sermon this morning is from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verses 10 and 11. If you lend your companion something, you shall not go into his house to get the pledge. You shall stand outside, and the person to whom you lend shall bring the pledge out to you. Our sermon today is about honoring and respecting boundaries. It's about learning how to stand outside the house, the mind of another person, and not enter in. Right now, with the crisis in Europe, the world is witnessing the flagrant and shocking disregard for the boundaries of a peaceful nation. And so we are praying for a peaceful resolution, praying that this may stop. Now, this is obviously an extreme situation and one that is deeply troubling, but this physical act of aggression illustrates an important principle. When boundaries are crossed, when people don't stand outside the house but enter in, boundaries are violated and a fundamental unspoken rule is broken. The will of one person is imposed on another. So much so that the person is compelled to think and believe as the other, and their freedom is taken away. So one of the themes in the sermon this morning is that of freedom, but in particular, respecting the freedom of others. If you think about it, it's one of the highest forms of charity, because in all of our relationships, it must be given the highest seat of honor, because this is what the Lord does with us. The Lord respects boundaries. He does not violate them. He respects our freedom. And we have so many teachings in our church which talk about how the Lord never compels anyone, doesn't compel them to do anything, even that which is good and true. Instead, we are left in perfect freedom every moment of the day to choose and think what we want. And this is because only what we freely choose becomes our own. On a very deep level, this is how we are saved, by freely choosing to shun evils and follow the Lord, not by the threat of someone else, but because that is what we see the Lord to be saying. This ability to freely, in the freedom of our own mind, our own home, to make these kinds of decisions is what makes us human and gives us our autonomy. This is also an important topic to consider because we all want harmony in our lives. We want harmony, agreement, a meeting of minds in all of our relationships. You heard a passage this morning which talks about this being the norm of heaven. Not everyone thinking the same thing, but a meeting of minds, an agreement, shared values. We want this at home, we want it at work, we want it with family and with friends, neighbors, in the church, in our country. And we certainly don't wake up in the morning looking for conflict, looking for disagreement. And yet, this is the world that we seem to find ourselves in right now. It's strange. It seems like the world seems poised, positioned, just waiting for an argument, waiting to argue about anything and win an argument, to convince the other side that it's right. I'm sure some of you might be saying, well, what happened to friendly debate, friendly disagreement? What happened to leaving a person in freedom to think what they want. Oh, I see what you're saying. I look at it this way. Well, these days, public debate seems to have gone one step further, where it is no longer acceptable to just simply agree to disagree. Now we must declare which side we're on. Now, I'm not telling you anything new here, but I think it's so interesting and important for us to ask these questions. Why is there so much righteous anger in the world today? Why is there so much upset? And for the purposes of our sermon today, is it possible that boundaries are being crossed and we don't even know it? Could it be that people are feeling like their freedom is being taken away? So let's talk about boundaries. Boundaries, as you know, come in all shapes and sizes. We have physical ones, like property lines and property markers. These are so important. We need to establish these property lines, these boundaries. Here's where my property is, there's where yours is. We have it for counties and states and countries. And the purpose of a boundary is to establish a certain kind of order so that we can be at peace in our own home. Imagine if there were no boundary marker. People could come and go. It would be very unsettling. So there are physical boundaries. There are what we would call personal or physical space kinds of boundaries, where someone comes right up to your face and it's a violation of our personal space. What are you doing? Move back. And then there are mental or spiritual boundaries, which is what the law of the pledge is all about. And the thing about these boundaries is that they are invisible. They're not seen, but we know that they exist, because we can feel when they are violated or crossed, when someone is trespassing in our space. Don't want to pick on salesmen, because salesmen have an important job to do, and there's good sales tactics and not such good sales tactics. But that's what I was thinking of in terms of coming across someone who is trying to convince you of something, the pressure tactics. How often do we feel when buying a car or just buying something? It's just like, the sooner I can get out of here, the better. The pressure tactic to be sold something. That feeling of being pressured to do or say something. It gets worse. Sometimes we feel guilted or shamed into saying or doing something because the pressure's on. Sometimes we can be bullied by others because they have the knowledge, they have the expertise, and they bully us into something that we don't necessarily want to do. Well, thankfully, we have the Lord and His Word giving us these incredibly beautiful teachings. We gain tremendous, helpful guidance on this topic by considering the ancient law of the pledge recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, which lays out what we might call the rules of engagement for communication between two people or two parties, the lender and the borrower. So let's take a quick review, because the reading that I gave this morning gets filled out in other little parts in the Word in the book of Deuteronomy, so let me just share some thoughts here. The Israelite lender, the one who is offering money or offering to lend money, in this law is not permitted to enter the house of the borrower to claim his pledge or the deposit, but was required to wait outside. That's the first thing. So the lender needed to leave the borrower in freedom, in the safety of their home, to either accept or reject the terms of the loan. If the borrower decided to accept the loan, he or she would bring out to the lender a pledge, which may have been a verbal or written contract or a valued article as collateral. But the overriding principle here, or law, is that the lender at no point in time could barge into the house and demand the pledge. So a pledge in this biblical context means a commitment, a duty, and a responsibility, again, on the part of the lender. So what comes out as you look at this law is that it carries this moral obligation. There are other examples. Israelite law prohibited lenders from charging interest on their loans to the poor and needy. In fact, the lending of grain or money to the poor and needy was considered more a gesture of goodwill than an opportunity for profit. Also, there were strict rules and regulations. A lender couldn't take a widow's garment, or a carpenter's tools, or a millstone as a pledge or as collateral, or anything else that was needed for that person's livelihood or survival. So after you study these rules and regulations for the ancient Israelite, what comes out, it seems to be quite obvious, is that the Israelite lender didn't have much to gain by lending money, if money was the objective, or profit was the objective. So I'd like to suggest that clearly this ancient law was not about money, and this is further confirmed by the fact that every sabbatical year, which is every 7th year, all outstanding debts were to be canceled. So the underlying spirit behind this ancient law of the pledge is one of goodwill, and perhaps more importantly, respect for the boundaries of one's neighbor. So in terms of correspondences, what we have here is we're told that the lending corresponds to communicating. We're all lenders. Let me lend you an ear. Let me share with you my thoughts, my opinion, my viewpoint. So we're all lenders, and we're communicating things constantly to our friends and loved ones, to people we care about, to the stranger off the street. We are constantly lending. The pledge is interesting because it takes sort of the second spot. The pledge corresponds to the response. And you have it right there in the law where the lender comes, here's some money, do you want to borrow it? Go into the house and come back with a pledge. What are you going to use as a deposit, as collateral? And the borrower goes back into the house and thinks about it. Either comes out and says, I'll take the loan, or no, I won't do it. So what we're talking about here in terms of these rules of engagement is what we would call basic communication. We say or do something, and the other person responds. Now, these roles can switch. Sometimes we are the lender, offering a viewpoint or opinion to another person. And sometimes we are the one inside the house, deciding whether or not to bring out a pledge, deciding whether or not to engage with this person. But as we know, good, healthy communication is not that simple, is it? Kind, useful, helpful communication is a lifelong project. And it's a lifelong project because it involves our will, a will that wants to get its own way. And so it takes a lot of spiritual work to become a good communicator. And in terms of this law, specifically, we are told it means not pressuring or inciting anyone to affirm our truth, but listening to the other person's response and taking it as the person experiences it. The command to wait outside to receive the pledge is about respecting the freedom of others to think and decide on their own. Calmly stating our case to a loved one or friend while not compelling them to agree with us can be very hard to do at times, especially when we feel passionate about the topic and consider it to be urgent and the truth. Well, in studying this topic, I was reminded of a vast body of doctrine that we have in the new church called the doctrine of spheres or atmospheres. And the fact that every human being, you can't see it, but every human being gives off a sphere. A kind one, an ugly one, an impatient one, a thoughtful one. As many emotions as there are, that's what our sphere can produce. It made me think, I think it was Mark Twain who said, "Who you are speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you are saying." So I want us just to reflect on this a moment, because this has to do with respecting the boundaries of others. One way to think about our sphere is to think about the quality of our presence. Is it inviting or is it repelling? And the point is, for our reflection, is we might think that we're standing outside the house, the mind of another person, a loved one or a friend, and that we're simply making our case and lending them our opinion and our viewpoint. But think about it. How inclined are you to listen to another person's point of view when they raise their voice at you, or they express impatience, or they come across as manipulative, or angry, or unkind? They might have perfectly true and important things to say, but we typically don't want to be in the same room. As to our spirit, we may shut down, or as we read in that third lesson, we would disappear. We tune out because that person has walked right into our house, our mind, without permission. And at that point in time, we no longer feel free. You also heard in our third lesson today that just as the Lord does not use his almighty force to compel belief in us, neither should we compel belief in each other. Rather, like the ancient Israelite lender, we offer our thoughts and ideas and wait patiently for the recipient to respond. If our offer is rejected, we simply come back another time. If it's accepted and a pledge is brought out, there is joy, not because we finally got our way, but because similar ideas, values, and beliefs were exchanged. And this, we are told, is the norm of heaven. And it's the harmony that we all so desperately seek. The desire for harmony is a desire for heaven's peace, where like minds join together for a common purpose, to serve the Lord and our neighbor. So just as the law of the pledge wasn't about making money, neither is our daily interaction with others about winning an argument or imposing our will on them or pulling them over to our side. To stand outside the house is to await the pledge and to respect the freedom of another and enjoy the free exchange of ideas. The ancient law of the pledge is about being willing to wait, being willing to save that heated debate, that difference of opinion, for another day. I'm often struck by the idea that there are very few issues in life that have to be solved on the spot in the heat of the moment. And it seems that this ancient law of the pledge is reminding us of that lesson. And let us end by not forgetting the sacred use of boundaries. Boundaries are created by the Lord, natural ones and spiritual ones, to provide for our safety, for order, for structure. Boundaries are safeguarded for our peace, are a safeguard for our peace and security, and most importantly, they allow us to live in true freedom. Boundaries speak to a sacred rule. This is my space, and it is the dwelling place between myself and the Lord. Amen.